Welcome back to the live hangout stream of the Erica Stefanko case. The overarching story is that she was previously convicted in 2020 of aggravated murder for her alleged role in the 2012 death of Ashley Biggs. Ashley disappeared while delivering pizza to what was allegedly a fake address called by Erica. This is Erica's retrial due to an issue with her ex Chad Cobb's remote testimony. And today we're going to listen to Chad Cobb's testimony, and he will be in court this time for her retrial. As with many others in this trial, however, he has elected not to show his face on camera, so that is who is pictured on the screen right now, is Chad Cobb, and his picture will remain up throughout his testimony as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Today's going to be pretty extensive amount of his testimony and what he has to say about his role, and then Erica's involvement as well.
Chad, will you please state your whole name, spelling both for the record?
Chad Cobb, Chadcobb.
How old are you, Chad?
41.
When is your birthday?
12882.
You said
12882.
And I see you're in orange. You are currently serving a life without parole sentence. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's for the murder of Ashley Biggs?
It's for that case, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I want to get a little bit about your background, Chad. What are your parents' names?
Jay and Cindy Cobb.
Are they married?
They are.
How long have they been married?
Oh, wow. A long time.
Okay. And where do they live?
Easton,
What county is that in?
Wayne County.
Do you have any siblings?
I do not.
You're the only child?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Where did you grow up, Chad?
Enid, Oklahoma.
Where?
Enid, Oklahoma.
And you grew up your entire childhood in Enid, Oklahoma?
No, ma'am. Moved up here in, I think 1988, 89, somewhere around there.
Okay. You would have been about 7 or 6 or 7?
Give or take. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you did some of your schooling to begin with in Enid, Oklahoma?
Yes.
How do you spell that?
ENID.
Oh, ENID. Okay. And when you moved up here, did you move to Eaton, where you live, or where your mom lives now?
Easton. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Easton.
Easton, correct.
So that family home that your parents live in now is when you moved up here, where you lived in growing up as a child?
Yes, ma'am.
When you came up here, you finished school going from Easton, correct?
I'm sorry, one more time?
When you came up here, you got back in school and you finished school from that location, Easton?
Yes, ma'am.
What high school did you graduate from?
Doylestown High School.
And what type of area is Easton?
Country.
Okay.
Farmland.
Okay. Cornfields, things of that nature?
Yes, ma'am.
And what type of area what is it, Oklahoma, that you moved from?
Plains.
Okay.
Super flat.
Okay. I want to talk about your high school. Did you play any sports or anything?
I was in martial arts.
Oh, were you? Okay. And you stated you graduated.
Yes, ma'am.
After graduation, what did you do?
Joined the Marine Corps.
Okay. How long were you in the Marine Corps?
Not long at all. Like 6, 9 months, somewhere around there.
And how old were you when you enlisted?
I joined the delayed entry program when I was 17.
When you came home from the military, did you do any tours or anything?
No, ma'am. No, I was stationed on the Eastern Seaboard down at Camp Lejeune.
Okay. And you said you did around 8 or 9 months?
Give or take.
What did you do once you got out the military?
Just worked, labor, mechanic, those type of trades.
Did you stay on the Eastern Seaboard or did you come back home?
Oh, I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood the question.
What did you do after you got out of the military?
Came back home to my parents' place and, just got employment.
Okay. And what type of jobs?
Labor or mechanic, installation, mowing lawns, things of that nature, until I got into communications.
Okay. At some point in time, did you establish your own company?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the name of that company?
Initially, it was just doing business under my name, but then it became Principled Connections. Then after some time, it morphed into Cobb Cable Company.
What type of services did Cobb Cable Company provide?
Telecommunication, installation, and maintenance. Did a lot of work for Time Warner.
Tell the jury how you came to have that company.
Just worked my ass off.
How did you acquire those skills?
I answered an ad in a newspaper and got a job with a place called Taylor Telecommunications.
Okay, and you took what you learned from there and created your own business?
Yeah, a guy said that I, had the makes to do it on my own if I can find enough volume to support myself, and kind of took him up on it.
Okay. And approximately how old were you when you started your own business?
Early 20s.
Okay. So a couple years after you got out of the military?
Mid 20s.
When you started that company, did you get any help from your parents in starting the company?
No. When I first got into the business, my mother let me use her truck for a couple of months.
And you say use a truck. Is that what type of equipment do you need in a cable business?
A lot of specialized equipment, a lot of hand tools. I really just a little bit of everything.
Okay. And when you say let you use a truck, you need a truck, I take it?
She let me use her personal pickup truck for a little bit while I was trying to secure one of my own.
Did you secure one of your own?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
And how many trucks did you have in your business when it was up and running?
When we were at our best, maybe 5, 6. I had a couple bucket trucks, a couple of vans.
And you said when we were at our best, did you have employees?
Mm-hmm.
Approximately how many employees at any given time did you have?
I really depended on the project. Sometimes it would just be me. Sometimes I had at 10, 11.
Did the company and running your own business take up a lot of your time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And for the most part, did you have a steady flow of clients?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you talked about at any given time, your employees. Does the name Mike Stefanko, are you familiar with that individual?
Yes, ma'am.
Was he one of your employees?
He was.
Now, I want to go back a little bit. How do you know Mike Stefanko?
Mike and I were best friends growing up when I moved up from Oklahoma. He was my next door neighbor.
Okay. And I know your family still lives there. Did Mike's family still live there as you grew up throughout the years?
Yes. Yeah, they still do, to my knowledge. I believe the Stefankos still own the property that's across the street from my parents' place.
Let's talk about schooling. Did Mike go to the same school with you?
He was a couple of years under me, but yes.
Okay. So that would have been the same high school and middle school and maybe elementary as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you two hang out together?
Oh, yeah.
And were the families friends as well since they were next door neighbors?
Yeah, absolutely.
Describe some of the things that you and Mike did together growing up.
Oh, good Lord, everything.
Okay.
From seeing movies, playing hide and go seek, just hanging out, doing what kids do, playing hacky sack, driving cars too fast. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he was the brother I didn't have.
And you kept in touch over the years? You and
Mike
Mike kept in touch over the years?
No, I haven't heard from him since this unfolded.
No. Prior to 2012, when you moved up here from Oklahoma, prior to 2012, during that time span, you and Mike kept in contact over the years?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk about one other individual. Are you familiar with an individual by the name of Ben Brinkman?
I am.
How do you know Ben Brinkman?
We met at high school together.
Okay, so that's another one of your high school friends?
Yes, ma'am.
And I use the word friends. Can you describe your relationship with Ben Brinkman for the jury?
He's a high school friend, very good man. We have similar interests with cars and whatnot, and that's about it, really. I mean, just another good friend.
And throughout the years, meaning from when you moved up here from Oklahoma till 2012, did you keep in contact with him as well?
Yes.
Are you aware if he's married or not?
Yes, he is. He's married to Mary Brinkman.
As an adult, have you hung out with Ben or Mary?
Yes.
And what type of things? And I'm skipping ahead a little. Did you and Erica Stefanko hang out with Mary and Ben Brinkman?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you say that Mike was one of your employees. How long was Mike one of your employees?
I'm really just guessing here, but I think he came on board when I was at Interspace, so I'm gonna say like 2009, maybe. So a couple of years.
Do you know if he had other employment outside of working for you?
Outside of working for me, not to my knowledge. I know before he worked for me, he worked at my father's company.
Okay, and what's your father's company?
It was Midco.
Okay. So at the time this occurred in 2012, you were, to the best of your personal knowledge, the sole financial provider for Mike, meaning he got his source of income from you?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point in time, did you meet an individual by the name of Ashley Biggs?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you please describe for the jury how you met Ashley Biggs?
I met her. When you're asking me to describe for the jury, am I supposed to be looking? You were looking at them.
Do what makes you feel comfortable.
Oh, sorry. I met her roller skating.
Okay. And approximately when was that?
Oh. It would have been before 2005, so if I'm guessing 2002, 2003, give or take.
Okay. And we're talking about Ashley Biggs. Who is Ashley Biggs?
Ashley Biggs is my oldest daughter's mother.
And who is your oldest daughter?
Grace.
Okay. And that's Grace Cobb?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said you met her, you said at a roller skating rink?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you meet?
Oh, roller skating, rollerblading.
Oh, okay.
Literally met, excuse me, inside of a rollercade.
Okay. Did someone introduce you?
Yes.
Okay. And from that introduction, was there a relationship started?
Yes, ma'am. Not at first, but we were friends, and then we started dating.
Okay. And how long were you two dating prior? How long were you two dating?
Altogether, maybe 3-4 years, give or take.
During that time, did you two ever move in together?
Yes. Yes, we did.
Okay. You two lived together. Do you remember around what time you two lived together?
I'm going to say 2004 and 2005.
Where were you living at the time?
When I first met her, I was living with my parents. Her and I actually ended up getting what would be my first apartment together.
At that time, when you and her got your first apartment together, had Grace Cobb been born?
No. No, ma'am.
Approximately how long were you two living together prior to Grace coming along?
6 months, year, give or take.
And when is Grace's birthday?
July in 2005.
Will you please describe your relationship with Grace after she was born?
I was her sole provider. So I'd say we had a good relationship. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing as a dad, but.
Okay. So after she was first born, is it fair to say you and Ashley and Grace, did you all live in that same apartment?
Not for long.
Okay.
No, when it was Grace, Ashley, and myself, we only resided with each other for maybe a couple of months.
After Grace was born?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened after a couple months?
She just kind of pursued other directions.
Who is she?
Ashley.
Okay. And when you say pursued other directions, what does that mean?
Just different relationships. Grace and I wasn't really very high on her to-do list, I guess, would be a decent way to say it.
And that is your opinion from being with her because she had left? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's not anything she said to you. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. So you said a couple months you two were together. You weren't hiring her to-do list. Does that mean, was Ashley still around at this time?
On and off.
And during that on and off time, did she interact with Grace?
She did, yeah, when she was around.
Okay, and how was that interaction?
Really didn't see a whole bunch because whenever she would come around, she'd want to take Grace to her friends or her mother's house or something like that. So like I really wasn't around for that part of it to really observe.
And you said you were, when she was gone or off and on, you were a new single dad. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you receive any help from your family?
I mean, they would babysit occasionally, and we'd go over there to hang out sometimes. But I mean, aside from that, that's about it. A lot of moral support, of course.
And were you working at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
You had Cobb Cable Company?
Well, no, at that time I was a subcontractor for Taylor Telecommunications.
In terms
It's
of,
still in cable.
I'm sorry. In terms of having Grace and your relationship with Ashley, when did Cobb Cable Company come into existence?
I didn't change the name until Cobb Cable until I think like 2010, somewhere around there.
When did you owning your own business come into existence in reference with Grace being born and your relationship with Ashley?
A year prior to Grace being born. I started cable in November of 2004.
Okay. Now, when Ashley left on or was back and forth off and on, did you know she was going to leave? Did you all have discussions about it?
No, we really didn't have discussions, but she would date other people and not me, which was fine. But then her relationships just kind of cutting into the her and Grace time too. So it was just a parting of ways, if you will.
And when you say she would date other people, was that when she was still living with you or after she had left?
Both.
When you said she was off and on and she would come back, during that time, were you expecting her to come back? Was this a surprise when she came back?
A little bit of both. A lot of it was kind of surprise. Sometimes I would expect her to return, and sometimes she wouldn't. It was very sporadic.
Now, we're talking about physical return. When she was gone, were there any phone calls, any other type of communication?
Sometimes there were, sometimes there wasn't. Like I said, it was pretty sporadic.
What were the time spans when she left? Was it weeks, days, months?
It could be weeks or days.
When Ashley would leave, would you know where she was?
No, ma'am.
And when she first left off and on, were you still at that same apartment?
Yes, ma'am. It would have been up in Akron.
And that's the apartment that you two lived in. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in the beginning, she would have known where you and Grace were. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Because she used to live in that same apartment, correct?
Correct.
When you were dating Ashley, did your mom or dad or other family get to meet her?
Did they meet her?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Okay. And when you say of course, how were they able to meet her?
Well, for a short period of time, Ashley actually resided with my family and I before we ended up getting the apartment.
Did she attend events or holidays or anything of that nature when you two were together with your family?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ashley is off and on, so she's gone for a little while. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
At some point in time, after Ashley left, did you start dating again?
Yes, ma'am.
So now you're on Mapledale Avenue, and is it all four of you living in that apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How many bedrooms?
2? Yeah.
What were the sleeping arrangements?
What were the what now?
Sleeping arrangements.
Oh, Eric and I had the big bedroom, and the kids had Grace's room.
And I just want to make sure I have this timeline right. Approximately when did you live? You said Elmdale?
Mapledale?
Mapledale.
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately when did you live on Mapledale?
Been 2005 and 6. Also 7. Sounds about right.
And part of that time was with Ashley. Part of that time was with the defendant, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. From Mapledale, where did you live?
After Mapledale?
Yes.
690 East Hopkinton Avenue in Barberton.
When did you move to 690 East Hopkinton? Is that right?
Hopkinton, yes, ma'am.
Hopkinton Avenue in Barberton.
Just ballparking, I'm going to say 2007, maybe 2008.
Who did you move there with?
It would have been Erica, Alexander, and Grace.
At some point in time, did you and the defendant get married?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when would that have been?
August of 2010, I think.
Okay. So we haven't got there yet. So you're at East Hopkinton Avenue in Barberton in 2007. How long did you live there?
Until FC was born, so...
You can say the name.
Oh, I can? Oh,
Yes.
okay, until Faith was born, because Barberton was a small rental house, and when she got pregnant with Faith, we really didn't have room in there, so that's when we bought a house.
Okay.
That would have been like 2009. Faith was born November 2009. I know we had that house before she was born, so...
Okay. So you started talking about children.
Prosecutor Easter, I just want to interrupt. How old is this individual, Faith? Because he said she was born in 2009.
She would be 14.
Okay, so
No,
let's just
15.
so let's stick to the initials.
Oh,
She's
okay.
under 18.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
So the initials would be FC.
Yes, ma'am.
And what's her date of birth?
11/19/09.
Is that the only child that you have with the defendant?
No, ma'am. We have a little boy, too.
And what's
Just
his
the
initials?
Thank you.
Casey.
And what's his date of birth?
4/4/12.
Okay. So you said after FC was born, that was a little house, and you needed more space. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you and your family move next, or what happened?
Well, after Mapledale Avenue, we ended up purchasing a house not too far away from my parents' farm.
What's the address of that house?
15007 Mount Eaton Road.
Is that in Wayne County?
Yes, ma'am.
In that house you purchased, did you work on that house at all?
Yes, ma'am.
You fixed it up, you put in your work on that house?
Very much so.
Okay. And that was your new family home. Is that a fair statement? So I want to make sure I have the children correct. There are 4 children now in that household. There's Grace, there is Alexander, there is Casey and FC. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there some point in time where you and Ashley did not have any contact?
Yes, ma'am.
When was that?
About September 2009.
That would have been before you moved into the Mount Eaton apartment or house?
Correct.
When you say no contact, does that mean no phone calls, no visits or anything of that nature?
Yes, ma'am.
Prior to you moving to Mount Eaton, did you tell Ashley you were moving?
I don't think I ever had the choice, or the chance, rather.
So you're in Mount Eaton 2009. Approximately a year later in August is when you and the defendant got married. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And at this time, you still were at, or you still own Cobb Cable Company?
Yes, ma'am.
During this time, your move from your initial apartment to Hoppekin Barberton to your new house, was Mike Stefanko working with you?
No, ma'am, not at that time.
Okay.
Mike Stefanko didn't start working for me until about 2009, 2010, somewhere around there.
During that time, did you have communications with Mike Stefanko?
Oh, of course.
Okay. Would he come over to your house?
Yes, ma'am.
Had he seen your children, during that time span?
Yes, ma'am. He would babysit them at times too.
And he had met the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
And so he was around, meaning for the birth of your children, he was aware after each child was born. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am. And to be fair, he was actually there for the birth of some of them.
Oh, was he?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he, I want to talk about your marriage to the defendant. Did you have a traditional wedding?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Tell me about your marriage or your wedding.
Got married on our front porch. Erica found somebody from Columbus, I think, to come up and officiate it, I guess. I think paid $200, and he gave us, if I remember right, I think it was $50 in $2 bills and a card as a like a congratulations type of thing.
Did you all have to have a witness?
There was none there.
Okay.
There was no witness there, so I mean, he was there. I don't remember the man's name though.
That's fine. Did any of your family or friends attend?
No, ma'am. No, this was not a wedding in the sense of like big celebration or anything. This literally took place on our front porch in shorts and sandals.
Okay. Was Mike aware that you got married, Mike Stefanko?
I don't see how he couldn't have been. I mean, he wasn't there, but I'm sure I would have told him.
After the fact, throughout the years, was Mike aware that you two were married?
Oh, absolutely.
I want to go to October 5th of 2011. During that time, what school was Grace attending?
St. Peter and Paul Catholic School in Doylestown.
How old would Grace have been?
That's a good question. 6? Yeah. 5, 6 years old, something like that.
Did anyone else in the family attend that school?
Yes, ma'am. Alexander.
Okay, so they went to the same school. Do you know what grade Grace would have been in?
Sorry, I do not.
That's fine. That's fine. Talk about Grace's normal day. How would she get to school approximately? Did you all have a routine?
Eric had usually taken to school. I was usually working all day. So as far as like her routine directly before school or during school, I just wasn't home for it.
Okay. Did the defendant work at this time?
I mean, she worked with me for the company.
Okay.
So, I mean, she, put in her own efforts for, what we had under our house, but she didn't have like a secondary job from that.
October 5th, was there anything that morning unusual or out of the ordinary?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So Grace, Alexander get off to school. Is that a fair statement?
Well, Grace and Alexander went to school, but Grace was not there when I went to pick her up.
And you would be the one, are you normally the one who picks her up?
If I'm home early enough, yes.
Okay, so the beginning of the day was normal.
Beginning of the day was normal.
Now, you said when you went to pick her up, what time did she get out of school?
Roughly 3, somewhere around there.
And when you went to pick her up, what did you learn? What happened?
Before I picked her up, Erica called and told me that they got her.
You said, okay. You said Erica called and told you that they got her.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Don't tell me anything else Erica said. Um, Based on what that was said, what was your impression? What went through your mind?
Shock.
Okay. And at this point in time, you hadn't made it to the school yet?
I was at the school. I was in the back parking lot by the playground because I had our littlest girl there with me.
Okay. And that would be FC?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do after you got that phone call?
Went in to see if Grace was actually in school.
If you know, how did the defendant know that information to give you? If you don't know, that's fine.
You'd have to ask her. I don't know.
Okay. And during that phone call, don't say what she said. What was her demeanor on the phone?
I don't think I could really judge her demeanor over the phone one way or the other, honestly.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. You have your youngest daughter. You go into the school. What happens?
I find out that Grace is not there.
Were you given information about what happened or what took place?
Yes, Ashley and Brittany obtained a civil protection order, which gave them temporary custody of Grace, and that allowed them to take Grace from the school about noon, if I remember correctly, 11:30 noon, somewhere around there.
Were you provided any paperwork when you went to the school?
There was an officer there, Shannon Gerber, and she handed me what I think was a copy of the civil protection order. So yes, I was given paperwork.
Okay, now, let me just ask the question. Were there any court dates about a civil protection order or custody prior to October 5th, 2011?
Prior to October 5th, no, but I was awarded full custody of Grace in 2007.
Okay.
That would have been the only prior court date before October 5th.
So were you given any notices of what was going to happen October 5th?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Any mailings come?
No, ma'am. Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And you just brought up something. You said you were awarded full custody back in 2007. I must have skipped over that. I apologize. So when Ashley left or was off and on, you went to the courts?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did Ashley come to any of those court appearances back then in 2007?
She did. I was contesting her for custody of Grace because there were things that were happening to Grace that wasn't right.
Okay. And that's when she was with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said the court awarded you full custody in 2007?
Correct.
Okay. During that time, you testified Ashley was still coming back off and on. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, until September 2009.
Correct.
When you were awarded full custody back then, did Ashley get any visitation? Any
Yes.
court-ordered visitation?
Well, she didn't really pursue the court-ordered visitation. We kind of had a decent agreement whenever she was around. She'd be able to see Grace when she wasn't around and doing her own thing. Just Grace really wasn't in the picture for her, but it worked for what it was at the time.
All right. I'm sorry. Let's go back to when you were at the school, October 5th, 2011. You were provided that paperwork. What did you do at that time? What was going through your mind?
Shock, obviously. I went and I talked to the principal to try to appraise the situation. She gave me a little bit of information, and the following day I hired an attorney and started contesting it.
Okay. Before I get to the following day, after you learned what happened with Grace, did you inform any of your family?
First person I called was my grandmother,
Okay. And what's your grandmother's name?
Betty Tallman.
And is that the Betty Tallman that lives at 731 Rex Lake Road?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if your mother was informed as well?
I know. I think I got a hold of my dad second,
Okay.
just because my mother was at work. But I know the first person I got a hold of was my grandmother. I mean, Grace was her baby, so I had to let her know, and then I think it was Dad, and I think it was Mom. So yeah, the entire family now.
And when you say you informed them, was that over the phone or did you go to their house?
No, I was over the phone.
Where did you go after you left the school?
Home.
And what was the
Mount
rest of
Eaton.
your, I'm sorry.
Mount Eaton.
Okay. And what was the rest of your day like that day, knowing what had happened to Grace?
Well, I know it wasn't well.
Do you have any personal knowledge of what your grandmother, Betty Tallman, did with that information you gave her?
I couldn't say.
Okay. So you don't know if she went over anyone's house or not?
At that point in time, no, I don't think she did anything to that nature.
Okay. But you would know because you went home to Mount Eaton.
Correct.
And you said the next day you immediately called an attorney.
Yes, ma'am. Ended up hiring Beth Judge.
Did you have any way of getting in contact or hold of Ashley?
According to the civil protection order, I couldn't.
Okay. At that time, did you know her phone number?
I did not.
Okay. Did you have the same phone number?
Yes.
Now, after that, you called Beth Judge. Was a legal process started, like a custody case?
Yes, ma'am.
During this custody case, were there hearings?
There was.
Multiple hearings?
Many, yes, ma'am.
And during this time frame, I guess that started on October 5th, 2011, were the police involved on some occasions?
I believe so.
Did you call the police on some occasions?
I know Beth Judge had me contact law enforcement to do a welfare check a time or two. And at the time, Ashley had counsel, and I think they did the same thing.
Okay. And so you said a time or two, what makes it more than one time?
I think that's safe to say, yes, ma'am.
All right. I would like to talk about the court process, the custody battle. It started shortly after Grace was taken from school. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Did it continue up until June of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
And you stated there were court hearings.
Yes.
Did the defendant go with you to any of those court hearings?
Yes, ma'am.
What was your, okay, you went home and you let the defendant let you know they got her. When you went home, what was the defendant's demeanor?
In my opinion, it hurt her too.
Okay. So at that time, at least from 2000, when you all met, until October 5th, 2011, she had been with Grace. The defendant had been with Grace. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know what Grace called the defendant?
Mom.
Okay. When you went to these hearings, did the defendant accompany you to those hearings?
Yes, ma'am.
Some of them, most of them, all of them?
Yeah, she was there every step of the way.
When Ashley was at those hearings, was she accompanied by anyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know who that person was?
Brittany Dunson.
Okay. Had you met that person before that day or whenever you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So prior to seeing Brittany with Ashley at court hearings, you had never seen Brittany before?
Correct.
Had you ever talked to her?
I didn't even know she existed.
Okay. Now, what was the nature of these hearings? Meaning, were they civil, not civil, something else?
They were civil. I mean, there was obviously a lot of conflicting opinions and whatnot going on, but they were civil.
Okay. Did anyone ever get into did you ever see them maybe waiting for a hearing?
See who?
See Brittany and Ashley. I don't know if there's a waiting room or hallways. Did you all ever interact prior to going into hearings?
Oh, yeah. Yes, ma'am. I mean, I remember on the first hearing, I actually asked, when I first saw Ashley, I shook her hand and asked her if she wanted to go to dinner to try to figure out what exactly was going on. So yeah, we met before court.
And go to dinner, would that be you, the defendant, Ashley, and Brittany, or just you and Ashley?
At that particular time, it was only Ashley and I that were up there.
Okay. Now, after these hearings and let me ask, did Brittany come with Ashley from what you saw in the hearings some of the time, most of the time, or not at all?
Most of the time. She wasn't there for all of them, but more or less she was there from what I observed.
Did you ever talk to Brittany or establish any type of relationship with Brittany?
I don't think I've ever said one word to her.
Okay. And during these hearings, what was, from your perception of what you observed, what was the defendant and Ashley's relationship like?
I don't think they really cared for each other at
Nope.
that time.
What did you observe, or what goes in the basis of your perception saying you don't think they really cared for each other?
I don't think I can answer that with the spousal privilege being
Okay.
invoked.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Because that would require me saying
What she said, so you're correct. Spousal, do not tell me what she said.
okay, so yeah, I don't think I can
Okay.
answer that.
Thank you. I will move on. Well, I can say your perception was based on conversations with the defendant.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And those well, let me put it in context. Your perception about how the defendant felt about Ashley was based on your conversations with her. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Yeah. When Ashley got temporary custody of Grace, did you have visitation?
No, ma'am.
You were not permitted to see Grace.
Correct.
Okay. Was there any time, okay, and I say visitation through the court system. Was there visitation through the court system?
No, ma'am.
Okay. At any time, did you go to the Barberton Police Department for drop off and pickup of Grace?
When I was able to start seeing her, yes.
Okay, so how were you able to start seeing her?
After a couple of months through the court stuff, I think maybe February, give or take, we were allowed to start seeing Grace from Ashley and Brittany.
Okay, and that was through the courts?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that, and I'm sorry if I'm confusing, that would be my definition of visitation through the courts, you being able to see Grace. So at some point in time, the court did order you were able to see your daughter Grace?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know how often?
Not very often, maybe every 2 weeks, give or take, something like that.
And when you did get to see her, there has to be a drop off and a pickup. Where would that take place?
Usually it was somewhere public, like, as you mentioned, Barberton Police Station. Sometimes it was at my grandmother's house. Sometimes it was at my parents' house.
Okay. Were there any issues during drop off and pickup?
Not that I can recall.
Going through a court process, was this a stressful time for you?
Very much so.
Was it a stressful time for your family?
Extremely.
Going through this process, did it take a toll on your relationship with the defendant?
Most certainly.
Okay. How did it take a toll on your relationship with the defendant?
Everything was high tension, often.
And when you say high tension, do you mean high tension between who?
Me and the defendant, me and Ashley. There was a big fight going over a child, so everybody was just, it was to push to the extreme.
Okay. And you said you and the defendant, you and Erica, and you and Ashley, from your perception, was it the defendant and Ashley as well? High tension?
That's fair to say, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I asked because you said everybody. Okay. June 20th, just to put in context, was a Wednesday, and the 21st was a Thursday. I want to discuss what happened that day, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk about that morning, just getting up June 20th. Did you have to work that day?
I know we were setting up for a job at some underground allotment.
And Mike was work. Did Mike work with you that day?
I don't remember. I'm not sure. I know that he went up there the first couple of times that we went up there. I don't even remember where the allotment was, but that morning I really don't remember if he came with me or not.
Okay. And at that time, did the defendant, was she working, helping you with your company that day?
That day, no, I was up there by myself.
Where would the defendant have been?
Home, I'm assuming.
And is it fair to say there would not have been school since this is June 20th and 21st? Was school out then?
Sure.
Okay, so I want to fast forward to that evening. Of June 20th. At some point, after work, did you go home? Before anything else, did you go home after work?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Approximately what time did you get off work?
I don't even remember.
Early evening, late evening?
I mean, it would have had to been earlier because I know later in the evening I was in the living room playing with the girls, so.
Okay. And the girls would have been Grace and FC?
Yes, ma'am.
Was the defendant there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, at some point in time you left your house, is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Tell the jury about leaving your house and why you left your house.
I left my house because I got a phone call.
Okay, and who was that phone call from?
Erica.
Okay, I thought you two were in the house together.
Well, I was there by myself. She ended up leaving at one point in time, and I thought you asked me, when did I end up leaving?
Okay. So
I might have misunderstood. I'm sorry.
Oh, probably me. So you were in the living room and your family was there. So at some point in time, the defendant left the house?
Correct.
Did she leave by herself?
No.
Who did she leave with?
The boys.
Okay. And that would have been Alexander and Casey.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what she left in?
The Lincoln.
And can you name that car?
It was a 2008 Lincoln Navigator.
Okay. And you left because of a phone call you received?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Where did you go?
I ended up driving to my father's company in Norton.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as stipulated exhibit, state exhibit number 1. Okay, I can do this.
If you need help, let me know. I can get Tristan. Do you need help?
He showed me very well. I suck at this, but I'm going to do it. Let's see. I did it. Okay, you said you went to your father's company?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the name of that again?
Midco.
What is Mitco?
It was a semi-truck company. haul everything except freight, scrap cars, scrap rocks.
And you say your father's company, did he own it or was he employed there?
Technically, he was an employee.
Okay. When you got to Mitco, what happened?
I parked my truck.
You parked your truck? What type of truck were you driving?
Green 1-ton.
Oh, it was a work truck?
No, ma'am. It was my personal vehicle. I mean, I use it for work sometimes, but
Okay.
I had a 2003 F350. That was my vehicle. Erica's vehicle was kind of Lincoln. Mine was the diesel.
You get there, you parked your truck. What happens next?
Erica shows up.
Okay. Is she driving the Lincoln Navigator?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you do once Erica shows up?
I ultimately end up getting in it.
I'm going to show you. Do you know the address of Mitco?
I'm taking a guess here, 3351 Barber Road.
Hey, if I say 3312 Barber Road, does that sound familiar?
Yes, ma'am. I was guessing.
That's fine. For purposes of the record, I'm showing 3312 Barber Road on Stipulated States Exhibit 1. To the screen. There's a white building. Is that Mitco?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Where would you have parked your truck?
In the back.
Was there a fence or a gate you had to go through?
It looks like there's still a gate there. So yes.
And you were able to go through that gate?
Oh yeah, it's not locked.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it can be closed, but the gate's never locked.
Okay.
Prosecutor, do you mean the gray building with white trim? Is that what you're pointing at? You said the white building.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, it's gray with white trim.
Okay, I just want to clarify. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you said you went in the back. There are several rows of, what are those?
It was set up differently at the time when it was my father's place. It was not set up in the manner that it is now. Similar, but.
Is that the area you went to?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the area that the defendant pulled up in the Lincoln Navigator?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's where you got in her or the Lincoln Navigator?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you all go from there?
From there up to Akron, to Ashley's place of work.
Were you familiar? Well, first of all, I'm sorry. When you got into the Lincoln Navigator, will you please tell us the positioning of everyone in the car?
Erica was in the driver's seat. I was in the passenger seat. The boys and girls were in the back. I don't remember where they were.
Is that a 2 or a 3-row SUV?
3.
And you come to Akron, Summit County, Akron. You said you go to Ashley's job.
Correct.
How did you know where Ashley worked?
I didn't at the time, but.
That's okay. You did not know where she worked at the time?
I knew she worked at a pizzeria place, but the exact place where she worked, no, ma'am.
Okay. But you were able to go to the place she worked at. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I was driven there.
Okay. And the action driven, you was driven by the defendant there. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you. Do you know the address of that pizza place?
I'm sorry, I don't. I know it's in Portage Lakes Plaza.
Okay.
Do you know the
name?
intersection?
You said you know the intersection?
Yes, ma'am.
What's the intersection?
I believe it's South Main Street and 619.
Okay. And did you know the name of the pizza place?
Domino's.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's listed as number 2 on Stipulated States Exhibit 1. Let me just stop it for 1 second. Okay. You said the intersection. Are you talking about it? I have a question, Your Honor.
What's that?
Is there a way that I think with this technology, he can point on his screen and everyone will be able to see it? Is there a way he can do that?
I'd have to get interested. I don't think he can do it on his screen.
Where he can touch it, but if not,
He can describe it. I think where what I believe you're trying to get in, he could describe.
That's fine. I know in some courts they can.
Yeah, this one doesn't have the touch screen. I'm
That's fine.
sorry.
Can you describe to first of all, do you see the intersection?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe to the jury where that intersection is?
That is the intersection of South Main Street and 619. 619 would be the road that's running more or less from left to right.
Okay. What road is this? Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see.
619.
Okay, and then the road going up and down, what road are you referring to that is?
That would be South Main Street.
So the Domino's. In this video, is that the Domino's you were driven to?
Yes, ma'am.
When you got to that Domino's, what happened?
Well, we actually didn't go to the Domino's, drove past it.
You drove past the Domino's.
Correct.
Were you alerted to, or did you see anything in the parking lot?
Yes, Ashley's car was pointed out to me.
Okay. So when you drove past the Domino's, you were aware that Ashley's car was in the parking lot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said it was pointed out to you. Did the defendant point out Ashley's car?
Yes, ma'am.
And you all were familiar with the type of car Ashley drove?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were you familiar with the type of car Ashley drove?
Oh, whenever she would pick up Grace, she'd be driving the same car.
Okay. Now, I do want to get a time frame, so I have to go back a little. I apologize. Approximately what time did the defendant call you when you were at home, if you remember?
A really early evening.
Okay.
I'm just taking a guess, honestly.
That's fine. Approximately what time do you think you went through this Domino's parking lot and was pointed out Ashley's car?
I'd have to say late evening.
Okay. Where did you go from there?
She made a right onto 619 and proceeded to head west.
Prosecutor Easter, I'm going to turn on the annotation button and see if that'll allow him to do it.
Okay.
You might be able to touch it now.
Can you touch it just to see?
I am.
I don't know if he can reach it with his hands.
He's handcuffed to his belt.
Oh, well,
Okay.
Thank you for trying, Your Honor.
Yeah.
The direction of travel that the defendant was driving, can we see it on the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to that intersection.
Mhm.
Which way did she turn at that intersection?
She made a right-hand turn, which would have been heading westbound,
Okay.
if my bearings are correct.
Did she come out this, did the defendant drive out this way?
No, ma'am. She would have came down South Main Street, southbound. Yes, that's. And then she would have made a right onto 619 at that intersection right there.
Okay. Where did you all go after that?
She ended up pulling into some parking lot of an office building.
A parking lot to an office building?
Yes, ma'am.
Had you ever been there before?
No, ma'am.
Did you know why you were the parking lot to the office building? Okay, so you go in that parking lot to the office building. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1, still, number 3. Oh. Do you recognize the building in this exhibit?
I do.
And what do you recognize that building as?
This is the parking lot where Ashley died.
When you went into the parking lot, where did you park?
She ended up pulling in the back.
And the defendant is still driving, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the children, were they still in the car?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you say the defendant drove to the back, is this the back parking lot you're referring to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when you look at this video, is it fair to say that the scenery may not have looked the same back in June 2012?
That's correct. It's different.
Okay. And what is different about it?
I remember the parking lot in the back being larger because it went over what would be to the right-hand side of the screen more.
And the trees, this was in June. Did the trees have leaves and foliage on it?
I would assume so, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, once you got to the back of this parking lot,
The parking lot was closer to that large tree right there.
this large tree,
Yes.
okay. For the record, I stopped it and we're looking, there's literally one large tree in the picture. Is that the large tree you're referring to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, once you got to the back of this parking lot, and 647 West Turkey Foot Lake Road, where we're at right now, is that in Summit County, Ohio?
I believe so.
It's in Akron?
Either that or New Franklin Township. I'm not sure where the municipal lines are drawn.
That's fine. When you were there, tell me what happened. Did you all stay in the car, get out the car?
I ended up getting out of the car and walking over to that tree.
What did the defendant do?
She ended up following me over.
Did you all have conversation by that tree?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were the children at this point?
In the Lincoln.
During the ride with the girls, to Mitco, were they sleeping or were they awoke when you left the house?
I think they were bouncing around in the back seat.
Okay. When you got in the car at Mitco, were the boys woke or asleep?
They were all awake.
Okay. So time has passed. Do you know, were they still awake, sleep when you got to, or you don't know, when you got to 647 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road?
When I walked out of Lincoln and walked over to the tray, I couldn't tell you one way or the other.
Okay. So you're at the key. You're at the tree. You and the defendant are having conversation. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how long did you stay over at the tree?
Minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes, if that.
After that conversation under the tree, did the defendant make a phone call?
She left the tree and walked back over to the Lincoln. At that point in time, she ended up making a phone call.
Okay. I want you to tell the jury about that phone call. Could you hear that phone call?
Bits and pieces of it.
Okay. And when she walked back over to the Lincoln, that's where the children still were, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you please tell, now this time, will you please tell the jury the bits and pieces you heard of that phone call?
Remember, she called Ashley's place of work to order a pizza. Used another person's name like Jennifer or Katie.
Okay.
I remember the last name was Mick something.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say it was like a half topping. I remember either half pepperoni or half mushroom or half something. I remember her saying working in the back to like keep knocking on the door. That's about all that I remember overhearing.
Okay. What was the defendant's demeanor when she was making the phone call?
Seeing her smiling.
After that phone call was made, did you have conversation with the defendant after that?
Yes, ma'am. She walked back over.
Back over to
the tree.
You were still at the tree at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What was the environment like out there? Was it light? Was it dark?
I remember it was a parking lot. I remember it had lights in there. It was dark outside, though.
Was anyone else back there? Were there any other cars?
No, ma'am.
So you were the only ones back there?
Correct.
Was the business open or closed?
Closed.
At some point in time, did the defendant leave that scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how long after the defendant left did Ashley arrive at that scene?
She arrived relatively quickly, but I don't know, like, as far as the exact time, 10, 15 minutes, give or take.
Do you know approximately what time that was? Do you know approximately what time the phone call was placed to order the pizza?
I'm assuming late in the evening.
How did Ashley get to the scene?
She drove. She had her car.
Was that the same car that the defendant pointed out at Domino's?
Yes, ma'am.
When Ashley arrived, where did she park?
She came in the back, circled around, and then ended up driving up to where that door was.
And you saw the photo. There was parking in the front. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
You just testified. Per the defendant placing the order, she was instructed to come to the back?
Yes, ma'am.
And the defendant was not at 647 Red Lake Road at this point in time. Is that a fair statement?
When Ashley arrived?
Correct.
No, ma'am.
You were there and you did not have a vehicle, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you wearing camouflage that night?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you have duct tape on your jacket or coat that night?
My jacket, yes, ma'am.
And what was Ashley's demeanor when she saw you?
She was pretty worked up.
Is it fair to say that Ashley did not leave that parking lot alive that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you take Ashley's car that night?
Yes, I did.
When you left out from 647 Rex Lake Road, where did you go?
I ended up driving to a bridge that's close to my family's property.
Where was Ashley?
At the time when I left the parking lot, she was in her car.
In the car you were driving?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that in the back seat?
Yes, ma'am.
In the back seat on the floor?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was the defendant?
She was right behind me.
Okay. So when you drove from 647 Rex Lake Road, and where did you go to?
To a bridge that's close to my family's property.
That's in Wayne County?
Yes, ma'am.
So you drove from Summit County to Wayne County?
Yes, ma'am.
And the defendant, you said she was behind you?
Yes, ma'am.
Was she behind you the entire way?
Yes.
And she went to that bridge in Wayne County with you, or behind you, following you?
That's correct.
What are we looking at on the screen now? And again, that is stipulated States Exhibit 1. What are we looking at?
I believe that's the bridge that I was referring to.
Okay. And is that a cornfield as well?
Yes, ma'am. It's surrounded by fields on all the sides.
Okay. And you said you believe that's the bridge. We're looking at, what are we looking at now on the screen?
I believe that's the bridge that I was referring to. I mean, it looks a tad bit different, but it's been a very long time, so it's to be expected, I'm sure. But yeah, that's the bridge.
And does that bridge have like a little access road going up to it?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Tell the jury what happened once you got to that bridge.
Erica pulled up in the Lincoln directly behind me.
What did you do?
I just kept driving.
Okay. Did the defendant keep driving?
No, ma'am. She stopped at the bridge.
Okay. And where did you drive to?
I just kept driving until I couldn't drive anymore. I ended up driving through the field where this picture is, where it's panning. I ended up essentially following that route down until I just couldn't drive anymore.
While this is playing, why couldn't you drive anymore?
Why couldn't I?
Right.
I reached the end of the field.
Okay, I just want to get some perspective. Want to make sure. Give me 1 second. The bridge, is it fair to say I am pointing to the bridge at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'm pointing to the place where the defendant would have stopped in the Lincoln Navigator?
Correct.
And you said you drove over that bridge. Do you know your path of travel? There's, for the record, I'm pointing to a tree line. There's tree lines, and then there's a cornfield. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you drive through the field? Or approximately where did you drive through the field? If you remember.
I really couldn't say my exact path of travel. I don't really remember. I just remember I made it to the bridge, seen her headlights behind me, and I just kept going. And like I said, I went down to the far corner. I mean, until I couldn't drive anymore. But the exact path of travel that I took, I don't remember.
Okay, and when you say the far corner, is it fair to say in this area, and I'm pointing to the far right corner of the field, is that the area where you would have dropped the car off?
That's the area where I ended up parking the car, yes, ma'am.
And you couldn't go any further? Is it fair to say there's water? And to drive any further, you would be driving into the water?
Yes, ma'am. That's Chippewa Creek.
You said that's Chippewa Creek?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you saw how it just panned from the area you dropped the car back to that access bridge. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
How far is that, would you say, in terms of half mile, quarter mile, 3/4 of a mile?
How far?
Yeah, is that distance from that access bridge to where you dropped the car off at? And if you don't know, that's fine.
I really don't. It's been so long. I mean, I could see it in my head, but as far as like distance between the corner of the field to where the bridge is, it's a hefty walk. I know that.
And I was going to get to that. After you dropped the car off, Ashley's deceased body was still in the back seat. Is that a fair statement in
Yes.
between the seats?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What did you do
I'm sorry.
after you dropped the car off? Where did you go, or what did you do?
I ended up walking back towards the headlights, the Lincoln.
And you walked back towards the headlights of the Lincoln. It was still there waiting for you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The defendant in the driver's seat, children in the back?
Correct.
Approximately how long did that take for you to drive all the way out there and then walk all the way back? If you don't know, that's fine.
Time is was a little fuzzy
That's fine.
at that time, so I don't know.
And you stated it was a hefty walk. Would it have taken some time, like a good amount of time, for you to walk from all the way back there back to the
Yes, ma'am.
Lincoln Navigator?
Yes, ma'am.
So this wasn't a quick little ordeal. You had to drive all the way out there, but then you have to walk all the way back. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how long did it take you to get from Summit County to that cornfield?
30 minutes, give or take.
When you walk back to the Lincoln Navigator, describe your person, your body. Are you clean? Are you dirty? Are you bloody?
I just got into a horrible fight, so I was a mess.
Okay. Was that visible on your person?
It would have had to been.
Okay. And when I say visible, is that something based on your perception, getting in that car with the defendant would have seen?
Oh, yeah.
Where did you go? Oh, and when you got in the car, did you get in the passenger seat?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the defendant was still driving.
Correct.
Where did you go after leaving the cornfield?
Our home, Mount Eaton.
Were you and you said you were familiar with that cornfield area?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you say where did your parents live in reference to that cornfield area?
Not too far away from it. I don't really know my bearings around that bridge, but their property sits right against one of the fields that's very close to that bridge.
Okay.
So from that bridge, I can walk to my parents' house in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
5 or 10.
Did you walk to your parents' house that night?
No, ma'am.
Did you see your parents that night?
No, ma'am. We're on the opposite side of the field.
Okay. When the defendant saw you, when you got back into the truck, what was her demeanor?
I couldn't honestly say.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really remember paying her any attention. I really couldn't say.
That's fine. And your shoes from walking through that field, did they have dirt or mud on them?
They would have had to.
When you got back to the house, and what house was that?
Our residence on Mount Eaton.
Okay, and that 15007 Mount Eaton Road?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell the jury what happened when you got back to your house.
She ended up pulling down by the garage and parking next to a little demolition derby car that I had right next to it.
What did you do?
I ended up getting out of the Lincoln and ultimately ended up taking off all my clothes.
You did what after you took off your clothes?
Forgive me, I'm trying to tread carefully because there's spousal privilege, so I'm not.
I'm asking you about your actions, not what was said.
And so please pardon me. I'm just trying to make sure I play by the court's rules and whatnot. But I know when she pulled down by the demolition derby car, I ended up taking off all my clothes and I ended up taking a shower.
Where were your clothes? Where did you put your clothes?
By the Lincoln.
Okay. I'm going to show you, it still states exhibit number 1. I'm going to take this step by step. What are we looking at in this exhibit?
I believe that's the back of the residence of Mount Eaton Road.
Okay. And
Bless you.
we're looking at the back of the house I'm pointing to, which would be the first one on the slide. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And that's your house, your family home with the defendant, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So just to clarify, you're pointing to the house on the right.
Correct. And you said I know the defendant was driving, you testified, pulled to the back of the house. Approximately where did you stop?
There is a garage that's actually attached to the house. It's what the master bedroom is over, and it would have been at that corner. So how you have the video playing, it would have actually been the right-hand side of that house, the back right-hand side.
Okay, the back right-hand side.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's where you dropped your clothes or took off your clothes.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there some more stuff? Well, at that point in time, was there more items in your backyard at this time?
Yeah, there was a chicken coop, or it used to be, way back in the back.
And that's not reflected in this video. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. You said there was a chicken coop. Was there anything else in the backyard?
No, pretty much. I mean, I remember that we had a swing set. I remember we had a burn pile pit. This stuff that's in the very back almost looks like targets or something. I mean, that wasn't there, but the chicken coop would have been very close to where that burn pile pit is. I'm assuming that's still a burn pile pit.
Were you fixing on the chicken coop at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a bench, so to speak, in the backyard?
Yeah, there were sawhorses, some
what it is,
plywood
sawhorse.
and siding, some tools and what have you.
Okay. I am pointing to a cement area. What is this area I'm pointing to?
That was that's a concrete pad. Basically, I was in the process of constructing a detached garage that I obviously never finished.
Now, does that look like it did, and this is stipulated, this was not taken at the time. Did it look like this back in 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh. And you said the garage would have been, is it over here?
How you have the photo now, it would have been that house, but on the left-hand side now, closer towards the bottom. You can actually see the garage door by the photo. That
Right here?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where the defendant would have stopped and you would have taken your clothes off?
Yes, around that area. Like I said, we had a demolition derby car that was parked very close to that corner, and I know she pulled in very close to the derby car.
Where was the sawhorse?
That would have been down by the chicken coop.
Okay, so that would have been further down the yard, in the backyard?
Closer to where the burn pile pit was, to where the property ends up going into like a wedge.
Okay.
The property's like a triangle, so.
So the last thing you know, your clothes were up near the garage, and if they were moved, you did not, or did you move your clothes down to the burn pile pit?
I took everything off by the corner of the garage by the Lincoln.
Okay. You go in the house and take a shower.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what the defendant is doing at this point in time?
I was in the shower, no, ma'am.
Okay. You get out the shower. What do you do next? Without saying why, what do you do next?
Well, ultimately, we ended up going back up to Akron.
Okay. Why did you go back up to Akron? What was the purpose of you going back up to Akron?
Somebody wanted to go back to the scene, and I'm sorry, I saw you shaking your head, so I'm trying to think
Why
how to
did you go
answer your
back to Akron?
question.
You don't have to say what somebody said. What was the purpose of you going back to Akron?
To go back to the scene where Ashley died.
Okay. Why did you want to go back to the scene where Ashley died? Was it a purpose of going back to that scene where Ashley died?
Yes, to clean up and to get something.
Okay. What was the something that was to be gotten?
Ashley's phone.
Okay. And to clean up that area. Okay. Were there cleaning supplies taken back up there?
Yes, ma'am.
Were those supplies put in the back of the truck?
Back at the Lincoln, yes, ma'am.
Correct, the Lincoln Navigator. Okay. When you went back up there, do you know approximately what time it was?
I was in the shower for a while, and it was already late, so I mean, it was late. It had to be early hours of the morning at that point in time.
And you had the drive time back up there. Would that have been a half an hour, or how long did that take?
Half an hour, give or take, I'm assuming.
Okay. Tell the jury what happened when you got back to the scene.
Got back up to the scene. It was pointed out that when we got to the scene, the officer had a flashlight pointed on the ground. There was officers at the scene,
Okay.
and there was a flashlight pointed on the ground, so kept driving.
Okay. Who was driving at this point?
I was driving at that point.
Okay. And Ashley was in the passenger seat?
No, ma'am. Erica
I'm sorry. Erica, the defendant, was in the passenger seat?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were the children with you all again?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if they were asleep, awoke, playing? What were they doing?
I know Grace was awake for as much as I can remember. She was awake. I couldn't say one way or the other about the boys, and at that time, I couldn't say one way or the other about FC either.
Okay. And from where you were sitting in the Navigator, you could see the police at the scene.
Yes, ma'am.
And from where the defendant was sitting, based on your perception, could she see the officers at the scene?
Yes.
Okay. Did you stop at 647 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road while the officers were at the scene?
No, ma'am.
What did you do?
We ended up going down to my grandparents' residence, which was very, very close to that.
And your grandparents' residence is, what's that address?
I think it's 731 Rex Lake Road, if I'm remembering right.
What are we looking at in this video?
That's my grandparents' residence.
And that's where you went?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do once you got to that residence?
ended up pulling down the back, and we were behind the back of this building for a little bit.
This is a house. Is this a house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You were behind the back of this house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said for a little bit?
Correct.
Okay. What's a little bit? Approximately how long did you say behind this house?
I don't know. 10, 15 minutes,
Okay.
give or take on that.
During that time, did you see any officers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell the jury about seeing the officers.
When we were behind the house, I remember an officer, a cruiser, driving by on Rex Lake Road. And when he drove by on Rex Lake Road, that prompted us to pull further down into the property to where the detached barn is. They're right off the top of the screen.
Did you yourself have any concerns about your children if the defendant would have been charged at this time?
If she was charged when we were at my grandparents' house?
Correct. Well, yes, during that June 21st, correct.
I mean, at that time, I couldn't say there was a concern, but there was a lot of stuff that I also didn't know at that time, so.
Okay. Concern about your children at that time? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And is it fair to say, okay, well, let me just go on. Now, you were charged, and when you were charged, there was a death specification, meaning it was a death penalty crime. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am, that's fair.
Okay. And my co-counsel, Prosecutor LaPrinzi, was he was the prosecutor on your initial case. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point, was there a plea agreement reached in that case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you plead guilty to aggravated murder along with multiple other counts, and the death specification was taken off the table? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's what happened.
Are you currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember when you pled?
I believe it was February of 2013.
And is it fair to say when you pled to those charges, the only plea agreement you had at that time was the death specification taken off the table? Is that a fair statement?
It's not entirely accurate.
Okay. So you were given something else besides the death specification taken off the table?
No, as long as I pled, though, I wouldn't lose my kids.
Who told you? You're saying Prosecutor LaPrinzi told you that?
No, I didn't hear from him, no, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's my questioning. From the state, not from your attorney, not from anyone else, the defendant, your mom, anyone else, from the state. When you pled, the only agreement was the death specification taken off the table. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I apologize. That was my phrasing of the question. Okay. So you said part of your agreement was your kids wouldn't, you said, how did you put it?
That I wouldn't lose them.
Okay. Again, that wasn't from the state. So when you made that plea agreement, was that something that you took into consideration when making your plea agreement?
What?
That you wouldn't lose your children?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that something you may have discussed with your attorney at the time?
It was my attorney's the one that brought it up to me.
Okay. And when you say you wouldn't lose them, when you go to prison, you don't have your kids now, do you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And when you say you wouldn't lose them, what are you talking about?
At the time, the children were JR 6'd from both myself and the defendant. They were in foster care.
Okay. JR 6 is a legal term. They were Rule 6, meaning they were taken out of your custody. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was you and the defendant's custody at that time. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said you would lose your children. How would you lose your children?
Adoption.
Okay.
And their last names being changed.
Okay. And that's if you did not take a plea.
That's correct.
And this is coming from your attorney.
Yes, ma'am.
The defendant was not arrested at this time. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
You thought you would lose your children if the mother, the defendant, was out?
If she was out.
If she
was out at
Right.
that point in time.
And you still thought you would lose your children?
They were in the state's care.
Okay.
And after what happened to Grace, I know for a fact I'd lose them.
What happened to Grace?
Well, all you got to do is look at the custody battle.
Okay. Now, that plea agreement with the state, has anything changed? Have you been offered anything else for your testimony from the state?
No.
Okay.
The state hasn't offered me anything.
In fact, is it fair to say that you're appealing that court process and that plea? Is that a fair statement?
I've been fighting against my case, trying to bring new facts against it since I was forced to plead.
Since when?
Since I was forced to plead.
Okay. And again, you saying that's with your attorney?
Yes, ma'am.
From the advice of your attorney? Okay. And those were confidential conversations that you had with your attorney. Is that a fair statement?
Sure.
Well, the point is the state was not in on those conversations. Is that a fair statement?
To be fair, I have no knowledge of the prosecutor's office having anything to do with that.
Okay. Now, you said you have been trying to fight an appeal. Is it fair to say each step of the way the state has objected and filed objections to that?
Well, yeah, that's what they're supposed to do.
Okay. And has there been anything offered in exchange for your testimony today?
No, ma'am.
In fact, there is an appeal now, and you specifically asked the state you needed some help with that appeal. Is that a fair statement?
Not necessarily help. I was asking for a fair trial.
Okay. A fair trial and for something to be done with your plea, the basis of your appeal. Is that a fair statement?
If you're referring to the meeting we had on January 5th, the only thing I asked for was a fair trial where I'm not forced to plead guilty.
Okay. And at that time, were you told nothing is going to change from our end, the state?
Mr. LaPrenzi made that very clear.
Yes. And you were asked, were you still going to testify? Is that a fair statement?
I said I was still willing to cooperate.
Is it your belief or understanding that by testifying against the defendant, that somehow will get you out of prison?
Oh, this isn't my case.
Okay. So that is not your belief.
No, I know that me being here for the defendant's case, in one part, this isn't my stuff. Okay. I have to litigate my actual case, which I was doing until you guys subpoenaed me up here.
And again, we subpoenaed you. Is that a fair statement? You didn't come looking for us.
Yes, ma'am.
For this trial. Okay. So it's your belief this is the defendant's trial and your trial is totally separate. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
During your plea agreement, were you made aware through your attorney that the state was interested in information regarding the defendant's involvement?
During During my time in the county jail, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was before you pled guilty. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So during that time, you were made aware that the state was interested in information regarding the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you offer or give any information regarding the defendant?
Yes, I did.
And what information was that?
That was to my retained counsel at the beginning.
Okay. So that was not to the state?
No, ma'am. I mean, but to be fair, there are no direct lines of communication open between a defendant and a state attorney,
Okay.
aside from our appointed counsel or retained counsel.
And at that time, when you were going through your plea negotiations and pleading and sentencing, were you still married to the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
At any time during your plea negotiations, was it your concern about your children? Did you have a concern about your children if the defendant was implicated in this case?
Yes.
What was that concern?
Well, at the time, she was out, and she was the closest person to getting them back. So if something would happen to her, then the children stay in the state's care. Where as long as she can make it to them, at least the children get out of the state's care and they're a tiny bit closer to home.
Was that taken into your consideration to enter a plea?
My children have been the only basis for taking the plea.
Now, you're not saying that you are not responsible at all for Ashley's death, are you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. What are you saying?
That this is quite complicated.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things that haven't been spoken of. There's a lot of things that nobody wants to speak of, but that kind of needs to happen for there to be some transparency in exactly what happened.
Are you saying that you did this all by yourself?
Don't believe I've ever said that.
Okay. We talked about the date you pled. Do you remember around what date you were sentenced?
March 2013, maybe February 2013, give or take.
Okay. Were you aware that Erica was pregnant at the time?
No, I was not.
You are aware now that Erica was pregnant at the time?
Well, I mean, I first found out she was pregnant when she came to see me at Lorraine.
Do you know who is the father of that child?
Mike Stefanko.
Okay. And when she came to see you pregnant at Lorraine, were you still married at that point in time?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know her and Mike Stefanko, your best friend, were having an affair?
No, ma'am.
Were you confiding in Mike about what was going on up until the point you were arrested?
Yes.
And when I say confiding, I'm talking about what you testified to earlier about the custody battle.
Yeah, we were best friends. I mean, we talked about everything.
Okay. Were there times that Mike and the defendant were, let me go back. Did Mike have keys to your house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was before you went to jail, before June 20th, 2012. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am. He had keys to the house as soon as we bought it. He had keys to the apartment we had before that, too.
Did you have any indication, any signs that the defendant and Mike were having an affair?
No, ma'am.
After you were arrested and went to prison, do you know where Mike lived?
I believe he moved into the Mount Eaton residence maybe a couple weeks after I was arrested.
And that was your family home that you shared with the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the jury what happened to your company after you went to prison?
I believe the defendant changed the company name. I think it was like 13 days after she walked out of the police station, and they just sold it all.
You said they sold it all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And this happened while Mike was living at your house?
Yes.
So you were in prison and you don't have your business anymore. Is that a fair statement? It was sold
Objection.
off?
It's leading, Judge.
Do you want to restate?
Sure.
Thank you.
While you were in prison, did you have your business anymore?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
It was completely liquidated.
And that would have, who liquidated your business?
The defendant, and by some means, I'm sure, Mike.
So as you testify right now, you're not married anymore. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
And before June 20th, were you, Mike, and the defendant hanging out together?
Yes, ma'am.
Before June 20th of 2012, did you trust Mike to be around your wife when you weren't there?
I trusted that man with everything.
And before June 20th, did you trust your wife to hang around with Mike?
Yes.
Was Mike working for you at the time, June 20th?
Yes, ma'am. He was an employee.
Okay. That night of the incident, the murder of Ashley Biggs, did you make any phone calls?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell the jury about that. Who did you call?
Well, at what time?
After the murder of Ashley Biggs or during that incident, did you make any phone calls?
Well, after the incident, I ended up calling Mike for medication.
Medication for who?
The defendant.
Okay. What type of medication?
Anti-seizure medication, if I recall correctly.
Okay. And why did you call Mike for the medication? Well, first of all, did you get a hold of Mike?
Ultimately, yes.
Okay. That night?
Yes, ma'am. I believe at that point in time it'd be in the early hours of the morning.
Well, I'm sorry, the early hours of the morning. Initially, did you get a hold of him?
No, not at first.
Okay. Why did you, the urgency for that medicine?
I was instructed to call, so I called.
The reason I'm asking, there was no seizures had that night, was it?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay. There was no symptoms or anything of a seizure had that night. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair.
Okay. Did you make any other phone calls to individuals that night?
I couldn't get a hold of Mike at first, so I ended up calling my family, my mother, and told her that I really needed to get a hold of Mike, and I believe that she actually went over and got him up.
Did you tell her what was going on or what had happened?
No.
Okay. So when in the process were these calls made?
It would have been in the very early hours of the morning.
Okay. Was it after you went home at 731 Rex Lake behind the detached garage?
This would have been over at my grandparents' property.
Okay. Do you know what phone the defendant used to make that call?
I'm not sure.
The children living at the house at that time was FC, Grace, Alexander, and Casey. The only biological child that was not Erica's, is it fair to say was Grace?
Yes, ma'am.
And at some point in time, let me just go back a little bit. At some point in time, before you and the defendant were married, I think you said Ashley would come back into the picture while you was with the defendant at first.
Yes, ma'am.
At some point in time, did you and Ashley get back together while the defendant was out of town?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you tell the jury about that?
I'm going to ballpark it and say that was somewhere around 2008. The defendant was in Florida. I do not recall why. Ashley came over and we ended up having a night by ourselves.
Did you two have sex?
Yes, ma'am.
To your personal knowledge, do you know if the defendant found out?
I know she did.
Okay. What was her demeanor after she found out? Let's start with you, towards you.
How was the defendant's demeanor towards me?
Yes. How did she act?
Obviously, she was not happy about it.
And what was her demeanor towards Ashley? How did she act?
She was not happy towards Ashley either.
Did you carry out the murder of Ashley Biggs alone?
That night was done with two people involved.
Okay.
Sadly.
Who are the two people?
Myself and the defendant.
Were you at 647 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road alone?
Is that the
building, the closed
building
business,
with
yes.
the parking lot? No, ma'am. There was a point in time when Erica was there. There was a point in time when just I was there. There was a point in time when Ashley and I was there. There was a point in time where me, Ashley, and Erica were there. And then there was a time when we all left.
Were you at the cornfield alone?
No, ma'am.
Did you go back to the scene to try to clean up alone?
No, ma'am.
Did you hide behind a detached garage alone?
When I walked over into the tree line behind my
Nope,
grandparents'
when you
barn,
were in the car, in the Lincoln Navigator, were you alone?
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yes. When you drove to your grandparents' house at 731 Rex Lake Road and went behind that detached garage in the Lincoln Navigator, were you alone?
Oh, no, ma'am.
Okay. Who was with you during all of that?
The defendant.
Okay. Chad, as you sit there now, do you recognize that detective at the table?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that one of the detectives on your case?
Yes, ma'am.
Detective Hitchings?
Correct.
Now, while you were at the prison facility, at some point in time, did Detective Hitchings come and talk to you?
He did.
Did you talk to him at that time?
No, ma'am.
You turned him away?
I just told him out of the severity of the situation, it's probably best if I go through an attorney.
Do you know if he wanted to talk to you about the defendant?
I know for a fact he did. It's actually the first thing that he brought up.
Do you know approximately when that was?
2014.
So in 2012, you were, during your plea negotiations, you were being asked to cooperate against the defendant. And then in 2014, Detective Hitchens comes to you at the prison facility and want to talk to you about the defendant. Is that a fair statement?
It is.
At some point in time after that, did you write Detective Hitchens a letter?
I did.
And based on that letter, did you have further communications with Detective Hitchens coming to see you?
A little bit, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to show you some exhibits. I'm going to start off with I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 9. Do you recognize that photo?
Yes, ma'am.
What are we looking at?
That's my little girl. My oldest daughter.
Is that Grace Cobb?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see the year on that photo?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is the year on that photo?
11 and 12.
2011 and 12?
Yes, ma'am.
And that would have been the time frame of the incident we're talking about today?
Yes, ma'am.
That would have been how Grace looked at the time?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'll ask, does this photo fairly and accurately represent Grace as you remember her in 2011 and 12?
For the most part, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Was that a school photo?
I believe so.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 78 and 79. Well, first, let me show you State's Exhibit number 92. This is 92, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Do you recognize that exhibit?
I believe those are my work boots.
Okay. Were those the boots you were wearing that night?
It's been a very long time, but I don't have any reason to say they're not.
Is it fair to say those boots are dirty?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you now what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 79 and 78. First is 79. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I believe that's the inside of our Lincoln.
Okay. And that was the car that the defendant and you were driving that night?
Yes, ma'am.
What side is that showing?
Judging by
Describe
the
what we're
steering
looking
wheel,
at.
it'd probably be the driver's side.
And can you look at the floor, the mat area, describe the floor area?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 78. What are we looking at?
That would be the passenger side of the Lincoln.
And do you see a difference in the passenger side floor that's exhibit number 78, and the driver's side floor in exhibit number 79?
I mean, aside from the mud on the floor, no, ma'am.
That mud or dirt on the floor, is it fair to say that came from you that night?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 27 and 28. Do you recognize exhibit number 27?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what is exhibit number 27?
I believe that's the field where the Ashley and I's bridge is, if I'm not mistaken.
And to put this in perspective, the bridge, I'm pointing to the bridge on the document camera. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you would have taken the car to the far right corner where I'm pointing to now. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 28. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
What are we looking at in that exhibit?
I believe that's the area that you were just referencing.
Okay. And what do you see in that area I was just referencing?
I see a car in a creek, trees, and a four-wheeler path.
Now, from that, are you able to tell, is that the car? Is that Ashley's car that you left there?
It's a real small picture. I mean, it looks like it, but I can't see a lot of detail, so I can't say, for certain if it is, but it looks like it.
Well, let's say what you can say. Is that the area you dropped it off?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 95. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I've seen that image before, so I recognize it. It's obviously a Walmart and that would be me with somebody on my shoulders, and that would be the defendant with somebody in her arms.
Okay. And did you two have two small children at that time?
In 2012, at that point in time, we had actually 4 small children. I'm assuming the infant in the defendant's arms is Casey. I'm assuming the one on my shoulders is probably FC.
Okay. And you're assuming that, is it because the photo is blurry?
Correct.
Were you around any other kids that age?
Well, I don't believe this is the older ones. I'm assuming it's the smaller ones.
Okay. Oh, you're picking between your older and smaller children. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
They are your children in the picture.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And at the time when you were of June 20th, 2012, how old would all of your children have been at that time?
About 2.5 months, 2.5 years, 6 and 6.
Okay. So when you all were behind that detached garage, there was a 2.5-month-old with you in the car?
Yes, ma'am.
That night, was there a backpack? Did you have a camouflage backpack?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was the backpack that matched your jacket and your pants?
It would have had to have been similar, yes, ma'am.
Give me 1 second, Your Honor, I think I am.
Alrighty, that wraps up this examination and his testimony. This is definitely a different take than the first trial. As we could hear, he was definitely saying a lot less, not using her name Erica as like he did before, and not directly incriminating her, but rather saying like someone wanted me to go there and things like that to be more vague. With that said, I don't really see that playing that big of a role in the end of this trial. It'll be interesting to see how it does play out, but personally, I just don't see that affecting the outcome as much as maybe the defense is hoping, because that's not saying that the defendant wasn't there at all and things like that. He is directly saying that she was involved still. Just because he's being more vague and beating around the bush a bunch doesn't mean he's not incriminating her just as much. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out and if that has an effect in the end. So in any case, guys, this is where we're going to wrap up today with his testimony. We will be back tomorrow with some more testimony from some others and continue going through this trial. Thank you, as always, for hanging out today, and I will see you guys tomorrow.